194 against 354. The National Assembly has not approved. 194 for, 264 against.
For centuries, France has cloaked itself in the myth of unshakable stability. From the grandeur of the Élysée Palace to the polished corridors of the Assemblée Nationale, the French elite have crafted an image of a nation immune to the chaos it often attributed to others. France was the model, a place where governments might shift, but the system itself held firm. Yet, on September 9, 2025, that illusion shattered. Prime Minister François Bayrou's government collapsed after a no-confidence vote over his austerity-driven budget, a €44 billion package of cuts too bitter for a fractured assembly to stomach. The headlines called it a technical defeat, but this was no mere parliamentary misstep. It was the exposure of a deeper fracture, a corrosion of France's self-image that had been festering for years. Bayrou's fall wasn't just about numbers failing to add up. It was the collapse of a system stretched beyond its limits. France's debt looms at 114% of GDP, its deficit doubles the EU's limit, and its political machinery has been lurching from one prime minister to the next. Bayrou was President Emmanuel Macron's fourth appointee in just over a year, the fifth since 2023. This isn't stability. It's a carousel spinning without direction. When a nation can't sustain a government through a single budget cycle, what does that say about its strength? The collapse laid bare France's fragility, its dependence on appearances, and its refusal to confront decline. This fragility isn't confined to budget spreadsheets. It extends far beyond France's borders, to places where Paris once held unchallenged sway. The French state, which long lectured Africa about instability, now faces its own. When Mali or Burkina Faso ousts a leader, Western analysts decry failed democracies. But when France topples prime ministers like dominoes, it's framed as democratic turnover. The hypocrisy is stark. This isn't just a failed budget. It's the erosion of France's ability to claim it's the steady hand guiding others. The timing is brutal for Macron. Protests flood the streets, strikes cripple services, and bickering parties tear the assembly apart. The world watches as France's cracks become impossible to conceal. This political implosion isn't just an internal crisis, it's a global spectacle. The message is clear. If Paris can't govern itself, why should anyone else heed its commands? For decades, France bolstered its image of stability through its dominance in Africa. Military bases in Mali and Niger, the grip of Francophonie and resource extraction all propped up the illusion of global power. But as those ties unravel, France stands exposed, stripped of its borrowed legitimacy. Bayrou's fall isn't a direct result of Africa's rebellion, but the two are intertwined. Paris is losing at home and abroad. Simultaneously, France's power at home was long tied to its influence abroad. Africa was its proof of relevance. Troops in dusty outposts, African presidents paraded through Paris, currencies tethered to the French treasury. But what happens when those subjects reject their role? The answer is a slow, deliberate unraveling of French dominance, a divorce long in the making. Mali set the tone in 2022, expelling French forces after years of tension. Burkina Faso followed in 2023, reclaiming its security. Niger went further in 2025, severing military ties and quitting Francophonie. Chad, once France's stronghold, tore up its defense pact in 2024. Each rejection was a humiliation, each departing plane carrying French soldiers a blow to France's myth of global relevance. This African divorce wasn't impulsive, it was strategic. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso and Assimi Goïta in Mali didn't just expel the French, they mocked Paris's pretensions, declaring they wouldn't be lectured by a nation that couldn't maintain its own stability. Africa wasn't just walking away, it was pivoting. New partnerships with Russia, China, and regional alliances like the Alliance of Sahel States filled the void. French troops left, and Russian advisors arrived. French aid dried up, and African nations turned to each other, pooling resources. The departure of France didn't create a vacuum. It created space for something stronger, independent of Paris. The most painful loss for France isn't bases or leverage. It's the illusion that Africa needs it. For decades, France's domestic legitimacy was bolstered by its global projection. Prime ministerial visits to Bamako or Niamey were broadcast as proof of France's enduring power. Without that stage, the domestic rot is glaring. As Bayrou's government crumbled, Africa was dismantling the scaffolding of France's global image. Both collapses, domestic and foreign, mirror each other. France no longer commands obedience abroad or confidence at home. What did Macron do as this unfolded? He chose denial, framing retreats as strategic redeployments. He spoke of reshaping partnerships, as if France still set the terms. But the reality was clear. France was retreating, not repositioning. Macron's empire was one of rhetoric, not substance, an empire of sand slipping through his fingers. While demanding austerity at home, 44 billion euros in cuts, higher taxes, frozen pensions, he insisted France remained a global power. To the French worker, this was absurd. Why tighten belts for a state pretending to police the world? The budget's collapse wasn't just about numbers. It was a rejection of Macron's hypocrisy. A vote against a government claiming grandeur while delivering declined. Macron's empire of sand worsened the crisis. Instead of admitting Africa's loss, he used the illusion of global power to justify austerity. The logic was that cuts today would preserve France's status tomorrow. But that status was already gone. The Sahel, once a stage for French convoys, was no longer Paris's to command. Without it, Macron's rhetoric rang hollow. Workers, pensioners, and families sacrificed for a fantasy, and their anger spilled into the streets. Marches swelled across Paris, unions halted transport, and teachers and health workers demanded answers. Why pay for a government that lost everything abroad? France once lectured Africa on democracy, calling protests signs of weakness. Now, Paris's boulevards were clouded with tear gas, riot police clashing with demonstrators. The irony was stark. The state that sent troops to Bamako for stability couldn't keep its own capital steady. To African eyes, this was poetic justice. France's African debacle had material consequences: lost contracts, reduced resource access, diminished leverage. These translated into economic strain met with austerity. The French felt the impact, even if they didn't name Mali or Niger in their chants. The budget's fall was Africa echoing back into Paris. The betrayal ran deeper than economics. For decades, French leaders promised that empire sacrifices, deployments, aid, adventures secured France's global power. But when that empire crumbled, only the costs remained. Workers weren't sacrificing for victory, but for vanity. This fueled the fury in the streets. France, which once dictated terms to Africa, now faced its own people dictating terms. The reversal laid bare Paris's hypocrisy. A state unable to control its citizens had no moral ground to lecture others. The question now looms: who governs France? A nation that can't command obedience abroad or at home is in limbo, caught between past arrogance and future uncertainty. Leaders stumble, assemblies topple prime ministers, and streets pulse with discontent. The illusion of control is gone. While France shrinks, Africa rises. New alliances, trade corridors, and industries mark a continent building its own future. Burkina Faso's gold refinery, Niger's rejection of Francophonie, Mali's national projects, all defy the narrative of a dependent Africa. The student has surpassed the teacher, exposing France as the fragile one. Can France recover? Not as it was. It can't reclaim Africa's Sahel or dictate currencies. At best, it may settle as a mid-tier European power, relevant in Brussels but not beyond. The age of France as a global force is over, and Africa helped end it. For Africa, this is liberation. Rejecting French bases and institutions isn't a step into a void. It's a step into sovereignty. While France staggers, Africa builds its own stability. Historians will see Bayrou's fall as more than a budgetary hiccup. It was the unraveling of a state that thought it could dictate to others while failing to govern itself. Africa doesn't need France. But France, stripped of its illusions, may need Africa. And that is history's final insult.